Is it fun to look at great big piles of silver coins? It never gets old. This is always going to be fascinating to me, but there's been some recent developments in the world of Mexican silver coins that I think is really fascinating because it brings in Mexico's silver history and brings it right up to the present. So that's what this video is going to be about, specifically about the 1949 Mexican Onza. If you are new to the channel, my name is Dub C, and I want to thank you for spending some time with me on this channel. Hopefully you'll go ahead and click on that subscription button, become part of this community. We have a blast. We talk about precious metals, we talk about rare coins, and it's always an endlessly satisfying thing to look at and talk about. If you're one of my returning subscribers, thank you guys as always for being here. You've seen me talk about Mexican silver before, but we're going to shine a little light on one of the most interesting and fascinating pieces, and this is almost a prelude to a brand new video that will be coming out very shortly, specifically about the dawn of consumer bullion. This is going to be a fascinating ride. Strap in. If you're new to the channel, I like to begin all my videos with a simple disclaimer. I am not a financial advisor. I'm not trying to offer you any kind of financial advice. I'm simply trying to share some of my experience having bought and sold precious metals and rare coins for the last 30 or 40 years. And I like to start my videos with a couple of definitions that we can fold back into the subject. We're going to talk about a lot of Mexican silver coins. We're going to talk about American silver coins as well. But really, this story comes down to purity. What does purity have to do with anything? In the world of silver stacking, we think of pure silver as being 999 silver. That is 99.9% pure silver. It's a millesimal fineness. What it really represents is 999 parts per thousand are pure silver. And we think of 3/9 fine silver as being the silver standard. It is in the 21st century, but it wasn't always really the case. And we'll talk about some fascinating examples that drop down significantly from that 99.9% pure standard that we're all used to. So I want to start over here on the left, and if you've seen my channel before, you know that these are some of my all-time favorite pieces to talk about. What are we looking at here? This stunningly beautiful little coin is a Mexico 5 pesos. This is a 5 peso coin. This was a very short-lived series, 1947 and 1948. Mexico released these pieces. In 1947, 5,110,000 pieces. 1948, 26,740,000 pieces. What does that tell us? Well, it tells us that these were circulating coins, right? Nobody's going to release 26 million pieces of coins and have them sit in a desk drawer somewhere. These were meant to be spent. That's why they have a face value on them. But one of the interesting things about Mexican pieces, and remember, Mexico is part of North America. This is part of our North American heritage, is that Mexico continued to release these pieces well after the United States of America stopped releasing silver dollars. We struck our last dollars in the United States of America in 1935. These pieces, 1947 and 1948. The other fascinating thing about these pieces is that, like many pieces in Central and South America and many pieces in Mexico's heritage, they actually state very clearly on them what the silver weight and what the silver purity is. We just got done talking about 3/9 fine silver. 30 gramos ley 900, and you can see it's expressed in a millesimal fineness of 0.900. This is a 900 or 90% pure silver piece that contains 30 grams of 900 fine silver. So one of the great things about these pieces is that they often tell you right on them what the purity is and what the weight of the silver is. I think that's fantastic. These designs are phenomenal. Some of my all-time favorite stacking vehicles for silver. And while it's interesting and fascinating to see the price of silver as it's skyrocketed over the last several months to the point where it's between $40 and $50 right now as I'm filming. When I was stacking these, when I first began really hunting these and looking for them, when I kind of realized that I was a silver stacker maybe 25 years ago, these pieces cost 10 or 12 bucks a piece. That's all they were. The majority of the pieces that you see here, I picked up probably from about 2005, a little bit later than that, till about 2015, and most of the time I was paying $16 or $18 for these pieces. That's not the case anymore. Unfortunately, the public seems to have really caught on to the beauty of these pieces, the fact that the United States of America hadn't released a great big silver coin for much of the middle of the 20th century, while Mexico continued to release pieces in 1947 and 1948, and really up until the 1960s, they continued to produce large, relatively high pure silver coins. The 1947-1948 Cuauhtémoc pieces, some of my all-time favorite pieces. And if you watch the channel, you know that a few months back, I was able to drop some bids on some slabbed pieces. These are pieces that have been graded by a third-party grader. In this case, this is PCGS. And I was able to pick up an example of the 1947 and the 1948, kind of a bookended matching set here. Both of them slabbed by PCGS. This is slabbing is holdering these pieces and attesting to the grade that these are 67s. You can see it says MS 67. The 67 is a grade out of 70. We grade coins on a scale of 1 to 70. So these are very high grade examples of both years of these pieces. So glad to have those in my stack. So glad to have those in my collection, however you want to phrase it. 1948, the second year and the last year that they made the Cuauhtémoc. So what happened in 1949? Mexico took an interesting detour, and I've talked about this piece a little bit in the past. In fact, I actually made an entire series about stacking Mexican silver. It's called Stacking Mexican Silver. It's a 5 or 6 part series. You'll find a link to it down below. But in volume 4B, if I remember correctly, I talk specifically about these pieces. These are a fascinating detour from the world of minting coins. What is this? What are we looking at? This is a 1949 Mexican Onza. That's what these are called. You're looking at, it says Casa de Moneda de Mexico or Mexico. This is a huge coining press on them. Not unusual that you would find a coining press on a coin, right? These were enormously heavy hammers that you would swing with your hand. A little bit later, they became operated by steam and then electricity. And these would drive this screw down and stamp with enormous force the coining press to make modern coins of a really nice high definition. On the back of this piece, you actually see a scale. This is called a balanza. And the scale is not just an attesting to the purity or the weight of the silver, although clearly that is an element that's very important here. It also has references to things like liberty and justice, equality. And I think that makes for a really interesting thing to put on a coin also. But what made these very interesting is, unlike the fact that the other pieces that we saw, the Cuauhtémocs, the 5 pesos, these were actually weighed in troy ounces. I've talked about that a little bit in the past, the fact that this was probably one of the very first modern bullion pieces. When we think about modern bullion, especially when we think about silver, we think about 1 troy ounce increments. Other parts of the world sometimes use grams, and there's nothing wrong with that. We'll talk about that in just a moment too. And they use that gram weight specifically for 1,000 gram bars. We call that a kilogram. It's a metric system, and it's a very easy to use system once you get used to it. But precious metals have been weighed in troy ounces for many hundreds of years. And it's odd when you think about it that most major countries in the world produced very close to a troy ounce silver coins, whether it's the United States silver dollar, the Mexican 5 peso, but they never made these in 1 troy ounce increments. Isn't that peculiar? In 1949, Mexico remedied that with the onza. The reason it's called an onza is because it actually contains una onza troy, 1 ounce troy. So they're actually incorporating this not just into the coin, but to the name of the coin. This was an ounce, a troy ounce of silver. What's also great about this, and we mentioned before with the 5 peso, is that it said 30 grams of 900 fine silver. In this case, we have the purity listed here. It's 92.5 or 0.925 silver. Another example of silver standards. We talked about the 3 nines fine at the beginning of this video. But not only does it say it's 1 troy ounce, it actually has the weight in grains, 480, and it has the weight in grams. They were really driving home exactly what the weight of this piece was. And you saw that it also said 0.925 in terms of its purity. Its weight and its purity stated very easily for everybody to understand with a balanced scale to show that they meant it. But most significantly, the fact that it actually says 1 troy ounce. That is earth-shattering, truly groundbreaking. So how much were these to be spent for? What was the face value of the 1949 onza? That's what makes these fascinating. The idea that the Mexico City Mint released a coin-shaped object with a coin-striking press on it that has no face value. These were never designed to be spent. We would consider these almost a modern non-circulating legal tender item. Why would Mexico have released these? Maybe this was a souvenir, right? Maybe there was some kind of event in 1949 that celebrated the Mexico City Mint. Maybe this was something that was to be sold at the Mexico City Mint gift shop, if there was something like that at the time. That is not correct. Mexico released a full 1,000,000 pieces of the 1949 onza. Whenever a government is releasing that kind of a quantity of a piece, you know that this isn't just a one-off. This isn't just designed as a little bit of a souvenir somewhere. This, without a face value, was being struck in enormous numbers so that the people of Mexico could own silver. It was a modern consumer bullion vehicle, and it really was the very first one of these. And that's what makes the onza so fascinating. In 1949, they released 1,000,000 of these onzas, and they seem to be probably pretty popular. But this must have been really difficult for people to understand. You've got to think that it wasn't a coin. It wasn't meant to be spent. When they were releasing 26 million of the 1948 5 pesos, that's designed to be spent. People spent these, and we do find these in very well circulated condition sometimes. The onzas were never meant to be spent. It was simply a way for the average person to own silver. Fascinating concept. So difficult for us to wrap our heads around from the 21st century perspective. After the onza's release, Mexico continued to release large silver coins, the 5 peso, the 10 peso, and eventually even 100 pesos. Up until the 1970s, some were meant to be spent. Some of them clearly were designed as another silver bullion vehicle. But it's fascinating that this one-year type was never monetized with no face value because it was simply a way to own silver. In 1978, 1979, and 1980, Mexico re-released these pieces. They weren't exact duplicates. The verbiage on these pieces is a little bit different. Man, is that just beautiful when it's uncirculated, right? And again, why would they be circulated? They were never meant to be spent. They didn't have a face value. You do find these pieces worn down sometimes, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. What's also exciting about these is that because they were 92.5% pure silver, and I want to say this very, very clearly so everybody watching understands, they contain an ounce, a troy ounce of pure silver, but they're larger than a troy ounce because they were made out of 92.5% pure silver. Mexico alloyed, as they always had, their silver coins with a small amount of copper. That makes them a lot more durable and robust. The interesting thing is that even Mexico, when they were making something that was so groundbreaking, didn't really even grasp the concept that we do from the 21st century, is that these pieces were never meant to be spent, so they didn't need to be alloyed with anything because they were never going to wear down. They were going to sit in those cigar boxes under the bed or the safety deposit boxes. They were never going to circulate. They didn't need to have that alloy. But this was something we can still not quite see yet. It wasn't coming into focus. The 1978, 1979, and 1980 onzas. Very, very similar, small changes in verbiage. But what's fascinating about these pieces is that they were really leading the charge after the Hunt brothers run up as a modern bullion vehicle. They fell out of favor very quickly. Let's just stop and take a look at some slabbed examples of these. I was lucky enough to stop by a local shop 3 or 4 years ago, a little bit more recently than that, and they had about a half roll of these that had just come in. They had been very well protected. They were in their original little plastic flips that didn't seem to have been damaged too badly. The coins, the flips were in terrible shape. And I was just going to simply add them to one of my rolls of these pieces. Now, the thing is, I just mentioned that these are enormous. By modern standards, these pieces are huge. They dwarf a modern American silver coin. I'll take a look at one in just a moment. But because they're so big, they fit into a very specific small number of tubes. In this case, you actually have to find these medallion tubes that were made in the 1990s, and I don't think that they're even made anymore. So that's one reason why these pieces can be tricky. I went ahead and sent off this group of 10 or 12 pieces to NGC right after I got them. I was simply going to add them to these tubes to my stack. But they were in such phenomenal condition that I decided to go ahead and send them to NGC, and NGC agreed with me. They all came back 66s and 65s with one or two 64s, I think. Was it worth it? In retrospect, probably not. But because I had these beautiful slabbed pieces, I like having really nice examples of each one of these, and I was really fortunate to be able to add these 66s to my stack also. So these pieces are so big. Let's just do a quick comparison with an American silver eagle. The silver eagle is also a very large coin, one of the largest pieces that the United States of America has ever made. But the Onza is larger than the silver eagle by a fair amount. It's a little bit fatter. Technically, it's probably about the same thickness, but it definitely is a larger diameter. You can see just how much it is, and that's because it does contain a little bit of copper, 92.5% pure. We'll talk about that in relation to the American Silver Eagle again in just a moment. So 1978, 1979, 1980, Mexico makes millions of these pieces. They made 10,640,000 pieces, and then they stopped. Now, this is kind of an interesting concept because I think Mexico was really starting to catch up with itself. The idea of the 1 ounce silver bullion vehicle was catching on. This was becoming more popular. We had other vehicles that were very similar to that. And again, I will be releasing a video about the dawn of consumer bullion coming up here very soon. Keep your eyes open for it. But this silver coin concept was working really well. So what did Mexico do? They threw the levers, they shifted everything, they slammed the brakes. And in 1982, or 1983, or 1984, depending on when you first started seeing these appear, Mexico released the Libertad. What made the Libertad different? Well, for one, it was a much smaller coin, right? It's fatter, much thicker than the Onza. But what made the Libertad significantly different from the Onza is that the Libertad is 3/9 fine silver. Here's that fineness we were talking about. Mexico began to realize, like everybody, that if these pieces were never going to be circulating, they did not need to be alloyed with anything. And because the silver bullion was being denominated to 1 troy ounces, and the price of silver is almost always, at least in the West, given in the value per troy ounce, it made a significantly better piece to have exactly 1 troy ounce of 3/9 fine pure silver. The Libertad also monetized. We talked before about how these pieces were never monetized. Now, interestingly, Mexico kind of pioneered almost the concept of non-circulating legal tender too, because while these were monetized and these are actual coins, they were never really meant to be spent anyway. Something that we see reflected as soon as the United States of America started putting out the Eagles in 1986. It's fascinating, a fascinating journey back in time to look at these early silver bullion vehicles. But all of this builds up to the concept of having nice examples in slabs. This is something that I've always tried to do. Although all of these pieces are considered part of my silver bullion stack, I do like to have exceptionally nice pieces in slabs as reference pieces. I think it's a great way to add a little bit of interest to your stack. Because of that, while I do own a few 1949s, remember that's the original version, and this piece is probably a 63 on that Sheldon grading scale. I've never bothered to have it sent off just because I like having a raw example that I can share with you. I would like to have a really nice example of the 1949 Onza. And sometimes you kind of regret the effort that you put into something, because while I've been shouting from the rooftops the beauty of these early Mexican pieces and the fact that the 1949 silver Onza really can stake a claim to being the very first modern silver bullion vehicle, the prices have skyrocketed on these pieces. So while I've been telling everybody in the world about how amazing these pieces are, they've been taking me to my word, and the prices have run up dramatically, and that's what this video is really about. So in September of 2025, Heritage Auctions, one of my favorite auction companies, no, they are not endorsing me or sponsoring me in any way, had a couple of these pieces. Now, it just so happens that Heritage was the auction house from which I bought these 1947 and 1948s 5 peso pieces also. So when I saw that they had a couple of examples of graded 1949 Mexican Onzas, I decided to drop bids on those too. Interestingly, they had a 1949 MS65 NGC example and a 1949 PCGS MS65 example. So these are really apples to apples pieces. I think it's interesting. Heritage is kind enough to provide people who are bidding in their auctions with a little bit of auction history. It usually goes back 6 or 8 years, maybe 10 examples, the last 10 or so examples that have sold. So you can kind of see the trajectory of the prices. This is a really neat thing to see. And you're looking at the past auction prices of MS65 graded 1949 Onzas. What does that tell us? They seem to land right about in that $200 price range. Now, with silver somewhere in that $40 to $50 per ounce range right now, that's a little bit heavy, but it's not impossible, right? So having a 1949 in a nice third-party graders holder was really appealing to me, something that I wanted to pursue. So what did I do? I dropped a bid that I thought was actually pretty high. I dropped a bid of $225. Now, when you're bidding an auction, often you are required to pay the buyer's premium. So with the buyer's premium, which runs 15 to 20% often with a lot of auction houses, my $225 bid actually equates to $270. That's how much it's going to cost me out of pocket should I win. And I thought with a $270 bid, that would block out most buyers. Most people would look at those auction records that we saw just a second ago that were $180, $200, somewhere in that range, and think $270 is pretty high. Remember that their next bid beyond that would kick it up to somewhere around $300. And I thought that I would maybe be excluding other buyers from even dropping a bid on this piece. Boy, was I wrong. So I dropped a bid of $225. That's $270. When the dust settled, the NGC graded coin, and the dust is October 27th, I believe, the NGC graded piece sold for $432 with the buyer's premium. You're looking at a copy of it here. And note that they are also, the buyer of this piece has made this piece available to anybody else who wants to send them an offer at $648. So the demand for these beautiful examples of these early 1949 Onzas that have been graded by a reputable third-party grader off the charts, from $200 to $650 in about a year. That's astronomical. But I had dropped my bid on the PCGS graded example. Why is that? The NGC graded piece had a little bit of toning to it, which was okay. I don't mind toning. I think toning is an indication of originality, right? It hasn't been messed with. But the 1949 example from PCGS just had a little bit of brilliant luster to it. Sometimes we in the stacking community or the collecting field would call that a white coin because it's absent of any kind of tone. And typically white coins don't do a whole lot for me. I understand the appeal of them, but I do like a little bit of natural toning. It just adds to the authenticity. In this case, this coin just looked exceptional. So when you're comparing NGC to PCGS, the same grade, the same coin, you wouldn't think that there would be that significant a difference. It comes down to eye appeal, something else I'll be talking about in upcoming videos. When the dust settled on the PCGS MS65 that I had dropped my $270 bid on, it sold for $990. This went for almost $1,000. And you'll look on the side here, you see that those happy buyers are now entertaining offers on this piece at $1,485. So this is not even a coin, and they made 1 million of them. It's not entirely unlike the 1921 peace dollar. I think you can draw a lot of parallels between those two pieces. They are from roughly the same period of time, roughly the same size coin. They're made out of silver. But the 1949 Onza, up until very recently, was often thrown in with the 1978, 79, and 80 pieces because dealers didn't care about the difference. They didn't know the difference. There was no collector base for these. And maybe old Dub C shouting from the rooftop how amazing these pieces have been for the last 5 or 8 years has started to shift a little bit of interest to these pieces. $1,485. Wow. What are your thoughts about these? Do you have any of the Onzas? Is this something you're going to pursue? I think you should definitely look into these, because while dealers for the longest time did not like these, they really didn't. When I was picking these up, nobody wanted them because they were 92.5% pure, and everybody was after the new modern bullion coins that are 3/9 fine. These big, clunky, awkward pieces that didn't really fit in anywhere, that had never been monetized, that nobody was really collecting, were the first to go into the crucible, and these things were melted by the millions, I guarantee it. But most dealers had no interest in these, which meant that they didn't even register with them that there was an earlier version of these. The 1949s are really quite scarce. And while nobody was really protecting them and coveting these pieces, they tended to get knocked around and beaten up. They tended to be neglected. And that means attrition. And that means the surviving examples that are MS65 and higher are quite low. Check with your local dealers. They often still don't recognize that there is a significant difference between the 1949s and the later pieces. So if you are lucky enough to find one of these pieces, whether it's in kind of poor condition or even good condition, that's what we really want. We want these really beautiful, lustrous examples in MS63, 64, maybe 65 or higher. You've got a treasure there. You've got something that is really phenomenal. Now, the $900 price or the $1,485 price, asking price for this piece, is probably pie in the sky. We saw a comparable piece in the exact same auction sell for $400 in the 400 price dollar range. Their ask at $648. It's still significantly less than half as much as the person with the PCGS piece is asking for. So that shows a little bit of support in that $400, $500 range. The best way to compare what a price is, how much support there is within the field, is recent sales. And you'd be hard-pressed to find two more interesting apples-to-apples comparisons that have just happened. This just closed a couple of weeks ago. So there appears to be some support. I would urge caution. I'm not going to say run out and drop $1,000 on one of these pieces, but definitely keep your eyes open for them, because the chances are that your local dealer has not seen these auction prices and doesn't realize the demand is so high for the 1949s and even some of the newer pieces that you may still be able to hunt for these pieces and cherry pick the 1949 for yourself. Let me know your thoughts about it. If you have any questions about any of the pieces that we talked about here today, definitely leave a question down below. You guys know that have been to the channel before, I love questions. And if you've got a question, there's a good chance that somebody else has a question. Let's see what those questions are. Let's see if we can answer it for everybody. Let me know which of these are your favorite. Are you team Quatamach? Do you like the Onzas? Do you like the beautiful Libertads? I know I am addicted to the early Libertads. The later ones don't really do much for me. And there's nothing wrong if you like the American Silver Eagles. These are beautiful pieces, and clearly I've got rolls and rolls of these too. But there's something interesting and romantic about these Mexican pieces. It's neat to see the market starting to catch up with the way that I felt about these for a decade or more. Let me know if you have any questions. If you have an idea for another video, definitely drop that down below too. I may actually make a video based on your idea. I call that a subscriber video, and we've got a great collection of those growing. It's a great way to have your question answered with a full-length video. You can tell all your friends and family about it. While you're at it, go ahead and like and subscribe to this video. Hit the notification button, because I premiere new videos pretty much every Friday evening, and I'm almost always there during the premiere to chat with you, to discuss the topic that we're looking at in this video as it plays for the first time. And immediately after that video, I often go live with a live stream. You can join in, jump in. We talk about what we just talked about in the premiere video, but the floor is wide open to anything bullion, gold, silver, or coin related. Those fast-paced live streams are a fantastic way to start the weekend. I really look forward to those. Hit the notification bell so you can see when I'm premiering my next video and when I'm going live immediately after it. I like to end my videos by saying, always be learning. And thank you for allowing me to be a part of your journey as we go deeper into the world of coins and physical precious metals.